I'm so glad you're able to join me today for this complete class. My name is Betsy, and I'm going to show you today how to create this drawing. We're going to be doing this step by step, one piece at a time, all the way down to even doing the shading. So I hope that you have a little bit of time set aside for doing this. We're going to take about an hour and a half or so. And so just to get started, I want to show you what size paper I use. So what I have here is just some regular size paper because I'm in the United States. My page is about 8.5 by 11 inches. And so the easiest thing that I do is I just fold the paper and tear it in half gently. And then I take that half and I fold it in half again. So now I have 1/4 of that sheet of paper. So that leaves me with a page that is about 4.5 by 5.5 inches. So this is going to be a little different if your standard paper is different for you, but this is a pretty good size. I think it's manageable. And it keeps me from stressing out too much about having to fill an entire page. So if you're drawing inside of your sketchbook, you can just make a square inside of there that's a little smaller, and that way you don't have to feel overwhelmed. So that's it for the paper that we're using. And now let's talk about our supplies. They're going to be very simple. We're simply going to be using a pen, like a ballpoint pen or your favorite art pen. If you have any microns or Sharpies, those are perfect. We're also going to be using a pencil. Any pencil is fine. The one that I have here is a 6B. It's a fairly soft pencil. And of course an eraser, because we want to be able to get rid of any lines that we're not comfortable with. So now that we have our paper ready, the very first thing I want to do is I'm just going to take my pencil and I'm going to make this border around the edge. This isn't entirely necessary, but I like to make this border because it helps limit how far I'm going to go. It just reduces the space that I have to draw in by just a little bit, and it's also just a nice little guideline. So how about we talk about the first design that we're going to use. So it's just this little guy here, some nice swirls. We're going to be creating some that are large and some that are small. And they're going to be looking a lot like this. So I think that the spot I want to use for this design is going to be up here in the upper left-hand corner. And I'm going to start with a fairly large swirl. So here we go. So that's right there in the corner. And then what I want to do is I'm going to follow it up with a couple more that are just slightly smaller. So here's one. I'm going to add another one right here. Fill in that little triangle. And I think I can fit just one more right next to that one. So it's just going to go right here. And let me fill in that little triangle. Okay, so that looks pretty good so far. I'm going to do one more row of these swirls. So here's the first one. And I'm just going to keep working my way around. I'm going to skip a little bit right here and just fill in that space. So it's okay if they overlap a little. Don't worry about it if they overlap like that. We're just trying to fill the space. So how about I put another one right here? One right here. So that looks pretty good so far. I think I can add one more over here. And don't worry if the shape of your swirl changes a little. It's not a problem. So we have 3 layers, but I think I want to add one more. So this next one, they're going to get even smaller. So I'm going to draw lots of little guys in here. Okay, so anytime I have a little space, I just fill it with ink. Lots of little swirls. Add another one here. I think I can fit a couple more in here. I'm just trying to get to the edge. So one here, one over here, and I think that looks pretty good. So you notice we started with a large shape and they continuously got smaller. And this helps give a nice little illusion of depth. So we're going to go ahead and add some ink to the edge there, to the border here. Make a nice thick line. This is going to help separate this design that we just drew from the next one that's about to come up. So we're just going to close this off right here. Just going to go over the edge. So that looks pretty good. And now we can start thinking about the next design. This design that we're about to use really looks like very wavy little petals. And in this example that I'm showing you here, they are very layered, but in our drawing we're only going to use a single layer because we are going to have so many other elements in our drawing. So let's get started. So right here, we're going to let those petals follow the curve. So let's pick a spot to start. And I'm thinking we're going to start here on this left-hand side. So I'm going to draw these two curved lines, like so. And then between them, I'm going to add all these little frilly shapes. So you'll notice it's very wavy. Let's try making another one. So I'm going to leave a little bit of space and I'm going to make these two lines. So you notice they pull away from each other. Now we're going to do the top of that petal and it's very wavy. Okay. So let's see here. I'm going to leave an even bigger gap. So I'm going to come over here. Notice this one is short on one side but long on the other. Let's put one next to it over here. Here's one line and the other. And all these little waves. So now since I left some gaps, I'm going to put some in there. So here are my two lines. And now behind it, how about right here? A nice wavy line. And I'm going to fit one back here in this gap. So here are the two lines. And then the wavy line that connects them. So now they look like they're very nicely layered on top of each other, even though it's just one row. So the next thing that I want to deal with here is this edge. I don't really have to put anything here, but I'm just going to go ahead and add these simple little shapes just so that I don't forget to do it later. You can leave this empty if you want. And so as I start working these petals, the first thing that I would like to do is start filling in those little triangles that were formed. These are now part of the background. And so I'm just going to fill those with ink. You can create a little bit of a design there or just fill them in just in black. It's up to you. I'm really just adding lots of ink in there so that this falls into the background. So here's the next one. The next one, and it looks like I just have one more. I'm just going to go through and fill it in. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And to complete the look, I'm going to be adding some lines to the base of each petal. So let's start with this one. Like that. So starting at the base of the petal, and I'm just going to work those lines downward. So again, the point of these lines, these are nice contour lines, and they help those petals look a little less flat now. So here I'm adding a few more to the next petal. And notice that they're not all straight going in the same direction, they're fanning out, following the shape of that petal. So here's the big one. Lots and lots of lines in this one. So I'm just going to continue filling in that space. A few right here are going to come through the back. Maybe one more, like that. That should be fine. So just try to keep in mind like that, if your shapes are overlapping, keep an eye on where those lines would follow through. So I'm going to do this one in the front, just a couple of lines. And this guy here that's in the back, just a few lines. Now we just have a little one left over here. I'm just going to finish it up with a couple of lines. So you'll notice already it's coming to life. It looks so interesting. All these little petals with their wavy little edges. So if you need to, take a moment and inspect what you've done or just finish up some of your lines. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to do what I did with the last one. And I'm going to take my pen and I'm going to go around the edge here. So along the tops of all of those petals. And I'm going to draw in a thicker line. So if you're using a very tiny pen right now, you might want to switch over to a pen that's just a little bigger. That way you don't have to take too long making this thicker line right here. You'll notice that as we draw more shapes, as we add more layers to this black line will pretty much disappear. It's really just here to create a little depth between the layers, to really separate them. So I'm just coming through really gently and just adding that line. And if any of you are wondering which pen I'm using right now, this pen is a Sharpie roller. It is a ballpoint pen, and I do like it a bit. I used to buy this pen a few years ago, quite a bit. But unfortunately, the price has gone up, as is the case with pretty much everything right now. It is a very nice pen, and I like using it, but I only have a couple of them left, so I don't often recommend it. If you're in a position where you can spend money a little more freely, I would recommend for you to try these pens. It's a Sharpie roller. I think this size is a 0.5. So it actually turns out to be very similar to some of the other pens that I usually recommend. So I'm all done with the line here, and I think it looks pretty good. This is a nice setup. So now that we're done with this second design, we can start thinking about our third one. So I'm going to show you a little sample here. And this is a pattern that I have done a brief tutorial for. So you're welcome to find that in my channel under the tutorials. And so this shape, we're not going to make it as small as in this sample image. We're going to make it considerably larger. And I think I want to do this large enough where it's actually going to end up taking up quite a bit of our canvas, or our paper in this case. So I'm going to get started on the left hand side again. And let me see here. I think I'm just going to make one right here, going all the way to the edge. So there's my first curve, and here's the other half of it. So there you see it extends all the way to the edge of my pencil line there. And I'm going to add another one. Notice that I'm creating this little triangle, this little wedge there between them. So here's my second one. There's the wedge again. I'm going to add a nice big one right here. And here's the other half of it. Now, I didn't extend this all the way out to the pencil line this time. It did go out about 4/5 of the way. Here's another one. Again, I did not go all the way to the edge. I do want a little space left here for a couple of other designs that I want to add in. How about I add another petal right here? I think I want it just a little shorter. And it's extending out to the edge of the pencil in this case. So right there, comes to a point. Looks pretty good. So far I have 5 petals. And I think I want to add one more that is much, much smaller than the others. So right here, I did go past my pencil line, and that's okay. It's not a problem. Okay, so that's a pretty good start. So now that I have my main shapes in, I'm going to come back and I'm just going to fill in this little wedge with black. And now I can start focusing on the contours that go inside of these very large petal looking shapes. So you'll notice I'm just adding these long lines. And they're going to help this shape not look flat anymore. So if your hands are a little unsteady, these lines for you might come out just a little wiggly. They might not be as smooth. But just take your time. And it's okay if these lines are not perfect. So I'm just going to keep adding more of those lines until I reach the very edge. And you'll see here that at the base of each petal, I'm going to add just a few additional lines, and they're much shorter. And all that these lines are doing is they're adding just a bit more depth at the base of the shape. So as I move on to the next one here, I'm going to color in that little wedge. This is part of the background, so I want it to kind of fall back there. And I'm going to start on this next petal. Nice long line. And I'll start making these contours, going from the base all the way to that tip. And I'm going to keep moving over till I reach the edge. And I'm going to turn it around. It's usually just easier for me to turn it around. You don't have to, but I find that it makes it a little easier to make the lines on the other side of the petal. So here's another one, and I think I'm going to add one more. It gets a little tough once you're in a tight space like that, but if you're able to, give it a try. I know that this can be hard if you haven't practiced this kind of thing in a while. You might find that your lines are not so straight or not so smooth. And again, like I said, it's okay. You can always try again later. We've got a couple more petals to practice on. So here we're moving to the next one. And I'm adding that ink into that little wedge. Just letting it fall into the background. And this is the largest petal that I have, so I'm going to try to be as steady as possible with my hand. There we go. I'm going to add another long line. And here's the next one. Let's try one more. And I think that's going to be the last one, so I'm switching to the other side. add a few more of these contour lines. So starting at the base and all the way over to the point, down to the end of that petal. So there's my next one. Let's add one more. Okay. And another one. I think I can fit one more in here, so I'm going to give it a try. Let's see how this goes. Okay, that's not too bad. I think I might be able to fit another on the edge, but I'm just going to leave it alone. And I'm just going to add these shorter lines here to the base of the shape, just to help give it just a bit of a shadow here. And we are going to come in later with the pencil, so if these don't come out exactly the way you want them, we are going to add pencil later. And it might help bring out that shadow just a little better. So let's see here, I'm going to move on to my next one, and again, I'm going to put ink in this little wedge. Notice how it's really helping to give everything so much more depth. That nice dark spot right behind that petal is really helping it jump out, really helping it pop out. So whenever you're working on some doodles of your own, some designs of your own, pay attention to how just adding just sheer black in a few places, it's really going to help give your drawing so much more contrast. Because what happens is those nice dark spots, they have so much more weight. If you've ever taken art classes, a long time ago I took some beginner art classes, back when I was a youngin'. And that's one of the main things that I remember from those classes is the weight of things. So thicker black lines have more weight. Bigger objects have more weight. And so that's what I'm trying to do here. Is I'm adding areas where the lines are thicker and heavier, and that really helps balance everything out. So there we go. These are all the contour lines on this petal, and let me add a few lines right here at the base of it. Nice short strokes. So to make your strokes look really nice right here, make sure you're tapering them off. So you start the stroke with more pressure, and as you do the line, you want to release the pressure. So it looks nice and soft. So at this point, we just have 2 petals left, so let's move on over here. Just go ahead and color in that little wedge. And we can start making those contour lines. So I hope that you're enjoying this class so far. This is the second complete class that I have posted on my YouTube channel. And I learned a lot from the first one. So I'm doing my best here to take my time and go just a little slower. I don't want to rush you. I want to make sure that you have the time to follow along and replicate some of the shapes and the lines that I'm drawing here. So if you have a chance at any point, let me know. If you like the pacing, is it too fast, too slow? Is it okay? Are you able to follow along? Because that really is my goal. I'm really trying to make sure that this is enjoyable for all of us. And so you've noticed that I've added in little breaks, little moments where I'm not drawing. I'm instead showing you samples or other things like that. And you're going to see those throughout this entire class. And it's just to help you catch up, to help you stretch, help you get up and maybe get some water. So here I'm just finishing up this last little petal. Thankfully it was a little one. And adding in those lines. And since I'm already here in this spot, I'm going to just embellish this area with just a few very simple circles of a couple of different sizes. And I'm going to come through and add just a little more ink. Just add that dark contour along the edge, as I usually do. Again, this isn't necessary. I just really find that it adds that quality to the drawing that I really like. So right there. And I'm just inspecting all the petals to make sure that I didn't miss anything. So I think it looks pretty good so far. And I'm just going to continue over here in this little gap that's left between these two shapes. I'm going to add that dark line. And I'm not going to add any more of the same petals here. It's such a tiny space. So let's see here. I can add little circles in here. But I think what I want to add in here are just these small, almost like these little leaves. I'm going to put a long one in here. And you see how quickly it just fills in that little gap. And I'm just going to come in here and add that thick line that I usually add, just to complete the look. Make sure everything is pretty uniform. Okay, so that's pretty good. And I figure since I did it on this side, how about I come over to the other side where that first petal was, and I do something similar over here in this little gap that's right here. So I'm going to make that dark line first. Just around the edge. And I'm just going to add just some little shapes right here. You'll notice I'm again going outside of that pencil line that was there, and that's okay. As they say, it's a suggestion. And I'm just going to add that black line. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So now that this row is complete, I'm going to start thinking about what I want to create in my next space. So because of the way it's broken up, I'm no longer going to do an entire row of designs. I'm actually going to start working into these little triangular spaces. So this one right here, this one where I just added the dark line is where we're going to do the next design. So I'm going to go with this one here, where there are these little thin tendrils that tend to kind of crisscross and layer in a very kind of haphazard way. And so they're very thin and stringy. So I'm just going to start here, right inside of here. And I'm just going to make these one at a time. So let me draw one tendril. It's kind of long right here, very skinny. And notice that it's curving just a little. Let me make another one over here next to it. Now these aren't crossing yet, they're just next to each other. Let me add one here. This one's finally crossing over the very first one that I drew, and down in here. And I'm just trying to think of how I want them to kind of overlap. I think I'm going to have one come out here towards the right hand side, like that. I'm just trying to connect the lines so it looks like it makes some sense. Let's see here. I'm just going to add one here. And there's going to be one here that kind of goes at a slightly different angle, and it's going to be kind of long. So again, I hope you experiment with these shapes. Maybe trying to figure out if you go to the right or to the left, just let them kind of crisscross. So I think I'm going to put one over here on this left-hand side. It's just a little shorter. And I'll just fill in this space. And I'm going to put one here as well. They don't all have to crisscross or overlap in any strange way. You just draw them in however you're comfortable drawing them in. I'm going to add another little piece right here. And maybe here. And a little one here. And maybe one here along the edge. Just fill in any gaps where you don't want to put any designs. So like right here, I'm going to fill this in with ink. And I think I have just a tiny gap right here. Let's add one in there. Okay, so that's not too bad. I think that looks all right. A few of them are overlapping, a few are not. They're just kind of on top of each other, and that's fine. Nice little design, lots of tendrils. And before I move on, let me just add a few over here as well. I notice I have a gap here, this kind of space. So let me add a few of those tendrils over here as well. It just kind of helps fill the space so it doesn't feel like it got left behind. Okay, so you notice it was just 3 little ones, and then I went around them with ink. That looks pretty good. And so I'm looking at that next space, and it doesn't seem to be too big. So while I think about that, I'm just going to come over here and around all those little tendrils that I just made, I'm going to gently add some of that ink. Make a nice thick line around the edge. And this kind of gives me a moment to think about what I want to do next. So I'm just going to add ink around the border there. Just continue that same design that I'm already using everywhere else. Okay, so there we go. And so for that next design, what I'm going to go with is this one here. Because it's a fairly small space, it really won't take too long to fill it with this one. It's one of my favorites, and I think it's going to look great in that little space. So when we go in there, we're just going to do the usual thing. We're going to create that thick line. So here's one side. Let me go in and do the other side. So right here. Just to set it up and make sure that those spaces are divided really nicely by that dark line. Okay, that's pretty good. And so I'm just going to get started right in that tiny little space. Start with this tiny dark teardrop shape. And then I'm going to add a curve over that, like this. Follow it up with another and another. I usually like to do 3 of those curves, but you could do 2, you could do 5, as many as you like. My usual number is about 3 of them. So here's 2 and 3. Let's try another one here. So here's a little black teardrop. And then 1, 2, and 3 curves around it. And I'm just going to fill in the little gaps. So notice it's filling up pretty quickly. So I'm going to do a couple more. So right here, let's do the little teardrop. And then 1, 2, 3. Here's another one. 1, 2, 3. And I'm just going to add a nice awkward one right here. Here's 1. Fill in that space. Let's see what it looks like with 2 curves, 3 curves. Yeah, that looks fine. So here's another one, 1, 2. Here's another one, 1, 2. Let's add a third one. So feel free to add as many curves as you want. These can be as large or as little as you like. So here I just added another one. Here's one along the edge. And anytime that you have these little triangular spaces where you can't fit anything in, you can just fill that with ink. Those tiny black spaces will just fall into the background. So here's one right here. Fill in that tiny triangle. And I like how that looks so far, so I'm just going to come through and add that thick line around the border, just like I have been doing this whole time. So here's the line, there we go. It's not too bad. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So let's look at the next design we're going to use. So this is another one that I have taught before, and for those of you who have been following me for the last couple of weeks, you've seen this design in a lot of places, and this can be challenging for some people. So I'm not going to use it too much, but it is going to be a nice little practice for those of you who have found this to be challenging. So just to get started, right in that space, I'm just going to prep that edge, just like with the others. I'm going to make that darker line. Let's make that dark line on the other side as well. Okay, so that's pretty good. Let's see here. So to get started, the easiest way, or at least what I like to do, is I'm going to use a pencil. So let me grab my pencil, and I'm going to work into that space. And the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a very smooth little snaking line. So let's start right here at the deeper into that corner. So here's a little bit. I'm going to let it bend to the right and then bend to the left. Okay, so that's pretty good. That's going to bend to the right again. Notice that I'm varying the lengths of the line. All the way over here to the right. And then to the left. Let's try one more. How about there? So it bends a couple of times. Notice that it's pretty random in the lengths and where it bends. Okay, so now I want to use this to create that nice little ribbon. But you know what? Before I do that, let me use the pencil to create some soft lines here. So I want to show you. I'm using my pencil, and from the very edge there, I drew a line straight down into that little valley. So here's another one. I'm pretending that there's a dot down there where all these lines are going towards. There's one right here. Here's another edge. I'm heading down from there. Here's another edge. Down from there. This one I can't really see, so I don't have to make a line there. And there's one right here. So I'm going to draw a line heading down. And I've got the last one here. I don't like this curve here. I'm just going to go right here. So there we go. Those are all of my edges that I'm going to follow. And you're actually perfectly welcome to just trace all of this. Just trace it exactly as it is. I like to do something a little more, and so I'm going to show you. I'm going to come up that first line and head to the left, and then I'm going to stop. So this looks almost like a number 7. So that's my first line. It's like a number 7, heading up and to the left. So now that I have that first one, the next one's going to follow the next line heading up, and then it's going to go to the right. So it's still a number 7 but backwards. So up and to the right. And notice that I stopped right there. The next one is right here. And again, I'm going to head straight up and now to the left and stop. So this looks like a number 7 again. So I'm going to do the next one. So the next one is right here. Go slightly up and now to the right. And I stop. Notice there's a pattern here. So now the next one goes up. So it heads up and now it goes to the left and stop. Next one heads up right here. Notice they're not going to touch. It just follows the curve to the right and then stops. So none of these lines are touching at the curve. So here's the imaginary line. It's going to head to the left and stop right here. We have just one more left and it's going to start right here, heading up to the right to right here, and I can just close it off by bringing that last line straight down. So there we go, that's it. We just did a couple of curves, nice little practice. And again, if this was challenging for you, you were always welcome to do it the way that it looked with just the pencil. You could just trace that with your pen. When I do this, I just like to do it so that it looks a little bit more dimensional, so it looks a little fatter. I just like the way it looks. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to come in with my pen. And I'm just making a few lines here at the bottom. Just like I had with those very large petals. And this is helping to create somewhat of a shadow. Now this part can be difficult depending on how small those spaces are. So if you have really, really small spaces right here where I'm drawing these lines, feel free to skip this part. You don't have to draw these lines. We are going to come in later with the pencil, and you can always add your shading in with your pencil. So if you want to, you can take a break during this part and just watch how I add in the ink. So I'm going to add some here and follow along the top of this one here. This probably would have been a good time for me to switch to a smaller pen because this space is so tight, but I'm just going to continue using this one. I'm okay with it. So there, I added those lines. I'm going to put some here and maybe just follow that towards the left. So you see these are very, very tiny lines. They're a little difficult to fit in there just because the space is so small. If you want to try it, go right ahead and add those little lines. They're creating just this little bit of a shadow almost. So that looks pretty good. And let me move on to this part right here. They're like little eyelashes. I guess you could call it just hatching. Just to create a little shadow right there. And I just have one more space left, and it's going to be right in here. Just a few little eyelashes. Just to make a shadow right there. Okay, so that's about as much as I want to do right there. And so we're going to move on to the next design. And this is one that I had already thought of before that I really wanted to put in here. And this is how it looks when you have a lot of them layered. And in the space that I'm going to use next, I'm just going to use one of these motifs, not as many as you see here in the sample. So let's move on into that next space, which is this one right here. And I'm just going to start by prepping it as usual with a nice dark line. So I'm just going to add that there, and I'm going to add it to the other side as well. So that looks pretty good so far. Just take your time. Try to enjoy just using your pen. I'm just going to take a moment here to come back here and erase some of those pencil lines real quick. Okay. And so this space that we just prepped for that next design, I'm just looking at it to see about how big it is and how large I want to make the motif that I'm about to put in here. And it is fairly large, and I think I'm going to go with that. I want to make the design fairly large to fit in the space. So let's see how this looks. So because it is just a simple arch, I'm just going to start with that part. So from right here, I'm going to make an arch all the way across like that. Almost looks like a sun rising between the hills. Let me add another line on there. Now there are two of them. It's got a little halo. So that looks pretty good. And I think just to really accentuate how it's layered, I'm going to make a little line right here at the bottom, and I'm just going to color that in black. Nice little dark spot down there at the bottom. And so I'm going to add these lines that radiate down, or actually radiate up. So here's the first one. It's just a line with a dot at the end of it, nice and long. I'm going to add another one right here, a nice long line with a dot at the end of it, like that. I'm going to make another one on the other side that matches. So a long line with a dot at the end of it. And now in between those, I'm just going to add a few more of these lines with dots. And those are going to be just a little shorter than the first three. So you'll notice the heights are just kind of alternating. Okay, so there's those lines. I'm just going to come back in and make those lines just a little thicker at their base. I think that helps give them a little more weight down there. Just adding a tiny bit more ink. Okay, so now that I've done that part there, I think I'm going to add a design right in here in between these two lines, which is just a row of circles, just little circles. You could do dots here. You could do a couple different designs there if you like. So for me, it's just circles. So that looks pretty good there. And now I'm going to top it off with a nice little design over the top of that. And they are these little circles. Or, sorry, they're not circles, they're hearts. I don't do it very often, but I've been trying to do little heart shapes throughout my different designs, so that's what I'm trying to do here. So it's a little heart. So I'm just starting at the very center here. So there it is, a nice heart. Very girly. But I think of them more as like leaves. I'm going to add the next one right here next to it. So another heart shape. You could always try a different shape if you want to do some triangles, some teardrop shapes, some circles, anything else would look great right here as well. You don't have to do hearts if you don't want to. It's just a nice little embellishment over the top, just to make it look a little more interesting. Okay, so I got to the edge there. Let me do the ones on the other side as well. I'm going to place one right here. Notice that I'm also changing the sizes. That one in the middle was the biggest one. And as I head my way out towards the edges, they're getting just a little smaller. And changing the sizes this way also really helps give everything more depth. So there we go. And I'm just going to add these little dots just because I can. Just another tiny embellishment just to make it look just a little more interesting. So I think that looks pretty good. It's just something a little different just to give it more contrast with the different designs. So now I'm thinking that I want to move on to a space here on top of this ribbon. And I'm actually just going to start by prepping it. Well, I'm thinking about what I want to put there. So I'm going to create that dark line again. And I'm just going to go across the entire edge there and just follow it. Make that dark line. So that looks pretty good so far. And I think this is the design that I want to do next. It's another one that I use a lot, and it's slightly different than the one we used earlier. But it's, of course, very similar. It's that same long shape. So let's make a few right here. So they look like these long tendrils. And I'm just going to make them in a single row. I don't want them to overlap or to be layered on top of each other. So here's my first one. I'm going to add one right here. And another one right here. Notice how I'm leaving this little wedge in between them. I'm not interested in stacking them this time. I just want them to all be right next to each other. So here's another one. I'm going to make a little wedge right here. And I'm going to use that to make another shape right here. So notice they're all right next to each other. They're like little sardines in a can. Let me add that line at the base. It almost looks like a very long, skinny leaf. So I'm just going to keep working my way into that corner. So let me add another one here. So there's a little wedge. A nice leaf. Notice also that I'm changing the heights of them. Some of them are very, very short. Some of them are going to be very long. So here's the longer one. I'm going to add that line in the base. And right here, I'm going to put another one. Again, I'm varying the lengths of those. You'll also notice that as I add that little dark wedge in between them at their base, it's making it look very dark there. And it's starting to give the effect of a nice deep shadow right there. So here's that line. I'm making a little wedge. And then the shape. So here's that little wedge again. And then the leaf shape. So it's those little details that can really help change the quality of the drawing. So notice there's that wedge there. I haven't filled it in with ink yet. But now I'm going to fill it in. Put that line in my leaf. There we go. So here's another one. So it's a lot of fun drawing these right next to each other. I know that there are other designs that I have where I use this shape, and it can get a little complicated, but when you just draw them next to each other like this, they're also very satisfying. And they're much, much more easier to draw this way. Just a nice simple row, and they're still very interesting to look at, especially with that nice shadow that gets created there. So I'm going to draw a line right here to create the next one. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to follow it up with one right here. And right here as well, make that little wedge. Nice long one. I'm really enjoying that shadow that's forming there. It looks really good. So I'm going to make another one right here. I think as I work my way around right here, because there is a pretty open space there, I'm going to see if I can let these kind of flare out so they're not all pointed in the same direction. I want them to fan out just a little bit right here. So let me see if I can do that. Put a long one there. And then right here, let me make that little wedge, color it in black. One more petal. So what I'm hoping is that as you're practicing here, as you're drawing with me, that you are paying attention to all these little devices that I use to give the drawing more depth, to give it more interest. So even if you draw usually in a different style than this, maybe yours is even more abstract, and maybe you don't enjoy drawing flowers or organic shapes like this, you could still use a lot of this, even if you draw in a different style usually. I know I certainly use all of these. I do like to draw other things that look more mechanistic or like cables and wires and robots, and I use all of these same techniques in those drawings. So for our final design, we're just going to keep it simple, and we're just going to use lots of little circles just to fill in that last little gap that remains at the end. And we're just going to draw circles of various sizes just to fill in the space. So the space that I'm thinking of is above that lower corner. So right here. Let me just prep that area first. I'm going to add some ink. Just fill in a few circles right here, so that's kind of a small space. And I'm just going to add the ink around here just to separate those, all those little circles that I'm going to put there. I want them to be separate from this shape here. I'm going to add that thick line. And just work my way around slowly. Around those little hearts. So that looks pretty good. And just going to close it off right here. So I'm just going to continue by adding some more of those circles. I'm going to start off with some very tiny ones right here. As I work my way out, I'm going to start slowly adding even bigger ones wherever I see that they'll fit. Let's keep going here. This is one of my favorite ways to fill a space when I just don't know what to put in there. Circles will always fit. You can always fit lots of little circles, a couple of big circles. It's very natural looking, very organic. Looks like lots of little bubbles, little pearls. I'm going to fill in a few in here. So let me just add a couple in there. So that looks pretty good. Let me continue over here on this side, just adding a few more circles. For the most part, the ones that are closer to the little hearts, I'm going to make those circles smaller. And just let a few of them get bigger as I work my way out from there. Here's some little ones. So you can just change the sizes however you see fit. Just try to get them to fit in there. So I'm just taking a look at it just to see if I think I want any more. Let me put some ink here. So I think I'm happy with this. I'm just going to go around the edge of it just to create that black line that I've been making around everything else. So I'm just going to fill that in. And it is very time consuming going around the edge at this point. But that's why we're here. Just to keep our hands busy. All those tiny little spots, trying to fill them with ink. Just going around the edge very slowly. And if you are enjoying this class, I really hope that you are. Please let me know. You can always press the like button. That way I know that you enjoyed this. During the last class, a handful of people left me a tip, and I really appreciate that. That always helps so much. So thank you for that. And of course, you can always leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. I will read every single comment. Some of you may not know, those of you who are new to the channel may not know that I was a teacher. And so I am very much accustomed to looking at every single comment, responding to every single person, and occasionally I might not respond just because I'm a little short on time, but I do read all of your comments. I want to know what you're up to. I want to know what you're drawing, or if you have any suggestions for me, I would love to hear. I would love to know what suggestions you have for me. So you notice that I'm just working my way around all of these long little leaves, just taking my time. Just making sure that I enjoy what I'm doing. Such an interesting experience to be making lines on a paper, something that seems to be so unimportant. How could something like this be so therapeutic? And yet it really is. I know personally, when I'm here with a pen in my hand, when I'm just drawing, even though it's something so simple, it's just a pen, it's just a paper. It can really make such a difference in my day. It can make such a difference in my week, and I hope that this is helping you too. If you're here with me, then that means that you want this in your life. You want some simple drawing, and you want some time to relax. So I'm just turning the drawing around, and I'm looking for any other spaces where I still need to add a little ink, and I think it's over here where we got started, over by these swirls. I'm going to add that nice dark line over here around the edge. I'm just trying to make sure that everything is ready for when I come in and start doing the shading. That is going to be the very last step here, and it isn't a necessary step, but for sure, if you add a little shading, it is really going to help everything pop out even more. It's going to make it look that much better. So let's take a look at everything. I think everything's pretty good. I could add a few more things, but I think that I'm at a good spot right now. And so right here, I'm going to start thinking about how I want to add in some shading. And so I'm going to give you a chance to look for your pencils, if you have a couple of different pencils, to locate those. Maybe take a second to stretch your hands a little bit. You've been drawing for quite a while now. Maybe erase some of those lines. If you need to, this is probably a great time to go and get some water, get a sip of water, make sure you're staying hydrated, stretch your back and your neck. It's really easy to forget that we shouldn't be hunched over too much. So all I'm doing right here is I'm just erasing some of those pencil lines from before and just moving them out of the way, since we are actually going to go in and do some nice shading with our pencil. So here's a quick break. Make sure to stretch your hands. I know that's what I like to do. I'm going to take a break and just stretch my hands and find my pencils. And now we can actually start working on our shading. So I'm going to try a little bit of pencil here. And I'm going to start with the very first design, which was those nice swirls in the corner. And I just want to see, how does it look? I'm just going to gently add just a little graphite to the very, very corner. Let's see how that looks. And I do want to use a blender today for this, but I noticed that my blender is very dirty, so I actually want to take a second to show you what I do when my blender doesn't look so hot anymore. I'm going to grab this thing here, and some of you may have seen something like this if you ever bought a set of blenders or pencils. It came with one of these, and you'll notice that what it has on there is just some sandpaper. And I'm rubbing the tip of the blender kind of at an angle, and this is helping to scrape off the paper. So you notice if you keep going like this, keep scraping it, all of that is just going to come right off. And you can kind of just rub it back and forth. If you just have regular sandpaper, you can use that as well. You don't have to get one of these. I like to use just a piece of sandpaper, or I'll even use an old nail file. That works great. So you'll notice there, all of that paper and that mess on the edge kind of came off. And here it is. It's just clean enough where I can start using it again. So let's see how this looks. I'm going to come in and blend that area. And this looks pretty nice, so it's nice and soft. If you like that look of the pencil shading being really soft, this is a good pencil to use. That was in HB. I'm going to come in with that soft pencil, the number 6, and add just a little more. And I'm going to blend that just so that you can see what it looks like. So it's nice and dark. The soft pencils tend to lay down more of the graphite. And so for this, I'm going to continue using that number 6 pencil just because I think it shows a little better when I'm recording. So this is, you are welcome to use a softer or a harder pencil, however you prefer. So I'm coming in along the edge. You'll notice I'm working where it was already fairly dark. So at the base of those little petals. And then I'm just using the blender with my blending stump really gently. I can even use my finger. Notice all I'm doing is spreading it around. I'm not really trying to dig it into the paper. I'm just spreading it so it's a little smoother. And notice how it just blends right out really nicely. So that really accentuates that shadow right there and that separation between the patterns. So now I'm going to come over here. See where these little circles are? I'm not going to shade them individually. I'm just going to add just a tiny bit here and just spread it out. That usually does the job. So I'm going to start adding just a little bit of this graphite to the base of this large petal. I'm going to really gently just push it out using the blending stump. And now that my blending stump has got some graphite on it, I can use it over on the other tip. I also want you to notice how I'm holding the pencil. You don't have to hold it like this. I recently put up a video that talked about shading and practicing your shading, and it isn't necessary, but I did explain, and I'll let you know again, The whole point is to hold the pencil really gently and to not draw lots of scrapey, scratchy lines. So that's the only reason I hold the pencil like that sometimes. It's just to hold it a little further so I can make soft lines with the pencil. So I added some graphite over there to the end of the petal and also to the base. Let's do this next one. So notice nice gentle lines right at the base there. And I'm going to grab that blender and just spread out that graphite, just so it's nice and soft. And I'm going to add a little bit up here to the end of the petal as well. Let me try blending it with my finger. Yeah, that works pretty well. You might also want to use tissue. Tissue works really well. You just want to fold it so that it works in the spaces that you're using it in. I know growing up that's pretty much what I always used, was a napkin, a paper towel, or a tissue that was folded up. That works fine. So I'm just going to spread out that graphite right here. Now I'm just going to add some to the end over here. Just trying to add that graphite in really softly. And I'm just going to use my finger because it is a pretty wide area. I can just use my finger to spread it out. If you feel that the graphite's going to transfer from your fingers onto the drawing again, then you don't use your fingers. I'm trying to be very careful, and I generally don't get stains on my paper too much when I do this. But if you think you might get stains, then try to focus on just using the blending stump for that. So I'm just going to add some over here. Notice I'm adding that graphite to the base and to the tip of these very large petal-looking shapes. So that looks pretty good so far. And it looks like I just have one more of these. So let me just come in here and add that graphite to the base. Really gently. Now, if you ever feel like you do want to make it darker, you can always come in and add another layer of the graphite. Really accentuate those shadows. You'll notice that it can also have its own charm if you put in lots of deep shadows in here. And of course, I have heard that some people don't like to use pencil to do the shading, and that's perfectly fine. Something else that I like to do sometimes is I use color pencils. I'll use a couple of grays and a black pencil, and that creates lots of really nice shading. Or I could just go ahead and use just lots of deep colors, like a deep blue or a deep green, and those make really nice shadows. So I'm just going to come over here, and I'm going to start going along the edge with my pencil. So notice I'm starting right in the valley, adding lots of graphite. And then I'm going to use my blending stump just to drag it out from there really gently, to spread it out. Notice that makes a nice little shadow in there. And I'm just looking around to see which one I want to do next. How about this one? So again, I'm just going to keep it really simple. Put graphite right in there, right in that little valley. Then I'm just going to use the blending stump just to bring it out from there, blend it out. Just to make a nice little shadow in there. So you don't have to color and shadow every single little piece. You can just kind of do this general shading. So right here I added a little bit. I'm just going to soften it up. So that's pretty good right there. I'm going to work my way over here and work on the next one. So this one right here, if you decided not to add those lines, this is where the shading is really going to help you out. So I'm adding pencil from the bottom up. And I'm just going to add it sideways here because the space is very tight. So in all those spaces where I had drawn those lines, I'm just adding pencil there, and I'm going to use my blending stump to soften it. So everywhere where it's layered, where it feels like there's a shape on top of another shape, that's where I'm adding the pencil, is right behind that. Since I'm assuming that there would be just a little shadow there. I'm just going to come through and just make it nice and soft. If you didn't do the lines here, you might want to spend just a little more time getting some more of that shading in there. So I'm going to move on to this large shape that I did here. I'm going to put lots of graphite here at the base. Let me try blending this out. I don't know if I put enough there, but let me use the blender to soften it up a little bit and see how it looks. Again, if you add the graphite and you don't think it's enough, just bring that pencil again and go through one more time. Just add a little more. I think this looks okay though. I'm alright with it. It just helps create that little shadow down there at the bottom. So I think I'm going to move on here to these long thin leaves. And I'm just going to add that just a tiny bit of graphite at the base of each one. I don't really think that this space needs much shading just because of that nice deep shadow that was created while I was drawing the shapes. But I'm just going to add the tiniest bit just to help it along. And just soften it up. So really all I'm doing is just kind of dragging that graphite over and making a nice little gradient. So I think that looks pretty good. And I think that all we have left right now is over here. And I just noticed this spot right here, so I'm going to add just a little graphite along these edges, since this is a spot where the shapes are overlapping. Because I think there should be just a slight shadow right here, so I'm going to soften that. Just a tiny bit, and the one over here on this side. So again, these shadows end up happening wherever the pieces are overlapping. So I think I'm pretty good with that. And now there's space over here where there's circles. Someone had asked before, how do I shade that? And all I'm going to do is I'm going to add graphite along the edge. So see the edge where it touches the other design? Or essentially where that dark black line was at, I'm just adding graphite right there. Right up against the border. I'm not going to try to color every individual circle this time. So like that. And now I'm going to use the blending stump. Soften it up a little. If you want to, you can come back and focus on each individual circle if you prefer. But I enjoy just leaving it like this. Just making one big shadow for the whole space. So there we are. There are a few spaces if you like. You can add a few more circles, a few more little designs. Embellish it just a little more if you like. If you have the time, you could always add a nice border around the edge and decorate it even further. But here it is. This is the end result for mine. Because I did draw this on a loose leaf page, I'm going to add mine to my journal. A few people have asked in the past what I do with these, or how do I keep them organized so that I don't lose them. So I'm going to show you right now what I do. That way it can also give you a few minutes to catch up on any pieces that you did not finish, or just finish drawing a few more lines, or maybe adding some more of that shading And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this little guy, and so here's what it looks like inside of a blank page in my journal. And I'm trying to think about how I want to orient it. Like this. I'm not sure if I want to do it in the other direction. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some double-sided tape. It's a crafting tape that I've seen a lot of people use. And it's really just going to act like glue. Sometimes I'm not in the mood to use glue, so I'm just going to use the tape to put it onto the page here. So let me move my camera just a tiny bit. There we go. So if any of you have a journal or any other book that you like to draw in, and sometimes you just don't feel like drawing in it, this is a great way to use just a loose piece of paper and just enjoy the process. And that way when you're done and you really like it, you can just get some tape or get some glue, just like this. And you can just add it in there. Maybe put some stickers around it, or what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grab some washi tape in just a sec, since I still have some washi tape. And I'm going to use that to embellish around the edge, just to make it look nice. So I think this is enough of the double-sided tape. Let me see if I can get this off right here. Trim it just a little bit. It ended up being too long. And so if you're doing this where you're cutting the pages to have these nice small sheets and you don't want to lose them, then find another notebook, even if it's just a regular kind of college ruled with the lines or graph paper or anything really. Just when you finish these, just add them, glue them in there. That way you don't lose them and you have something nice to look at later. Let's see which direction. I think I'm going to go with this direction. Let's see how it looks this way. It can be really tough to decide. Okay, I think I'm going to point it this way with them heading upwards. I like it better like this. Okay. So I think that looks pretty good. Let me grab that washi tape really quick. And I'm going to go around all the borders, just so I can see what it looks like when it has just a soft touch of color around there. Let's see. I know I have a couple of them. This one. I'm not sure which one I want though, but I'm thinking pink. Something pink or maybe purple. It's going to be incredibly girly, so I'm sorry about that. I can't use one that's too wide though, because I don't have much space there. This one might work out. It has roses on it even, but I'm okay with it. I'll use that one. I was hoping for something a little less with flowers, but it should be just fine. So I'm just going to start laying it over here. And I think what the washi tape helps to do as well is it's going to keep the edges of my drawing from kind of flapping around. Sometimes other things can get stuck in there, so I don't want that. So I'm just kind of sealing off these edges. So there we go, just trimming off the edge. All these tiny little flowers. And I guess I'm just going to put another one along the bottom just to kind of complete the look here. Why not? Okay, so that looks pretty good. And now it's in here and I'm not going to lose it. So it's perfect that when I cut that sheet of paper into quarters, it fit into my journal. And now this guy can be in here. and I don't have to worry about it floating around. It can be safe in here. And because this has pencil shading in it, some of you may want to put some fixative, or I know someone reminded me that you could use hairspray to help keep the graphite from kind of staining some of the other drawings in your journals. I've done that in the past, but I've never really had too much trouble with the graphite transferring. So for me, I'm just going to leave it like that. I'm going to add a little bit of washi tape to that separation there between the pages, just to help keep it tidy. So there you have it. That is our drawing for today. It's all complete, ready to go, nice and safe inside of the journal. I am so glad that you were able to join me today. I hope that you had a good time, a nice relaxing time. And don't forget that I do this every other week. So 2 weeks from now on Tuesday, I will be doing this again, and you can join me and we can have fun drawing another wonderful drawing. Lots of inky wonderfulness. And maybe we'll even try something different for the shading. It'll be fun. I hope to see you then.